happened about 4 years ago when I was 16 on a late night train ride home from a friend's house in the city. It was mid-November and the air was sharp with cold, the kind that seeps into your bones. The train was one of those old relics with creaky seats, buzzing fluorescent lights that flickered unpredictably, and windows so smudged you could barely see the dark fields whipping by outside. I was alone in a nearly empty carriage sprawled across a set of 4 seats, my backpack tossed carelessly beside me. My phone was my only company, earbuds blasting music to drown out the hum of the train. I was scrolling through random posts half asleep when I noticed a guy sitting a few rows ahead. I hadn't heard anyone get on, and I could have sworn the carriage was empty when I boarded. He was hunched over, wearing a dark hoodie that swallowed his frame, the hood pulled low so I couldn't see his face. His hands were stuffed deep in his pockets, and he sat unnaturally still, like a statue. I figured he was just another late-night commuter, maybe tired or drunk, so I didn't think much of it at first. But every time the lights flickered, and they flickered a lot, I'd catch him turning his head just enough to glance my way. It wasn't a casual look, like you'd give someone out of boredom. It was deliberate, like he was studying me. My stomach twisted, but I told myself I was being paranoid. I turned up my music, focusing on the screen, trying to ignore the prickling feeling on the back of my neck. The train rattled on, the darkness outside unbroken except for the occasional flash of a distant streetlight. I kept my eyes on my phone, but I couldn't shake the sense of being watched. I risked another glance, and this time he was staring right at me. His eyes caught the dim light, glinting like a cat's, unblinking and unnervingly intense. I quickly looked away, my heart hammering, pretending to be engrossed in a text. My fingers fumbled as I typed nonsense to no one, just to look busy. The lights flickered again, and when I looked up, he was still staring, his head tilted slightly, like he was trying to figure something out about me. I decided I'd had enough. At the next stop, I grabbed my bag and stood, my legs shaky as I headed for the door to the next carriage. As I passed his row, he muttered something under his breath, too low to make out clearly, but I swear it sounded like my name. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. There was no way he could know my name. My ticket was in my pocket, and I didn't have anything with my name visible. I didn't look at him, just kept walking, my sneakers squeaking on the grimy floor. I pushed through the connecting door into the next carriage, which had a few more passengers, a couple of tired-looking workers, and an older woman reading a book. I sank into a seat near them, my heart still racing, and glanced back through the glass door. He was standing now, right at the edge of the carriage, staring at me through the glass. His hood was still up, but I could see his mouth curled into a faint, unsettling smile. The train lurched forward, and he didn't move, just kept watching as the carriage curved out of sight. I tried to focus on the people around me, the hum of the train, anything to calm down. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I kept telling myself it was nothing, just some creepy guy, maybe high or messing with me for kicks. Still, I stayed in that carriage until my stop, checking over my shoulder every few minutes. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and dumped my bag on the floor, trying to shake the whole thing off. I was digging through my jacket for my keys when I found something else. A folded piece of paper, crumpled like it had been shoved in there. I hadn't put it there, and I hadn't taken my jacket off on the train. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. Written in smudged, uneven letters was my full name, followed by the words, "Next time, stay." I stared at it, my stomach churning, then tore it to pieces and threw it in the trash. I haven't taken a late-night train since, and I still check my pockets every time I get home, just to be sure. My cousin Jake used to work as a ticket inspector on a regional train line that cut through rural nowhere. Miles of fields, woods, and the occasional crumbling barn. He told me this story from one of his overnight shifts last winter, and it's stuck with me ever since. It was around 2 a.m., the kind of hour where the world feels like it's holding its breath. The train was a red-eye, nearly empty, with maybe a dozen passengers scattered across the cars, most of them dozing or staring blankly at their phones. Jake was making his rounds, his flashlight bouncing off the worn seats as he checked tickets, the monotony of the job lulling him into a daze. In the last carriage, he noticed a man sitting alone, tucked into a corner seat. He was older, maybe in his 50s, wearing a tattered brown coat that looked like it had seen better decades. A scarf was wrapped tightly around his face, covering everything but his eyes, despite the carriage being stuffy from the overworked heaters. Jake approached, asking for his ticket, but the man didn't respond, just kept staring out the window into the pitch-black night. Jake figured he might be asleep or hard of hearing, so he repeated himself, louder this time. Still nothing. He was about to walk away when the man turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto Jake's. They were sunken, almost hollow, and Jake said it felt like the guy was looking straight through him, like he could see something Jake couldn't. "You don't want to stop at the next one," the man said, his voice low and raspy, like he hadn't spoken in years. Jake blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" he asked, trying to keep his tone professional. The man just shook his head, a small, deliberate movement, and turned back to the window. Jake stood there for a moment, unsure whether to press him or let it go. The guy's words didn't sound like a threat, but they carried a weight that made Jake's skin prickle. He decided to move on, marking it down as some eccentric passenger, maybe drunk or confused. But as he walked away, he couldn't shake the feeling that the man's eyes were still on him, boring into his back. Jake continued his rounds, checking the other carriages, chatting briefly with the other conductor up front. The train rumbled on, the darkness outside unbroken, the only sound the steady clack of the wheels. When he looped back to the last carriage about 20 minutes later, the man was gone. No bag, no scarf, no sign he'd ever been there. Jake frowned, scanning the empty seats. He checked the bathrooms, the connecting cars, even the narrow gaps between carriages where someone might hide. Nothing. The train hadn't stopped since he'd spoken to the man, and there was no way to get off without jumping into the freezing void outside. Jake's pulse quickened, but he told himself the guy must have slipped into another carriage when he wasn't looking. At the next station, a small, dimly lit platform in the middle of nowhere, Jake did a final sweep of the last carriage. On the seat where the man had been, he found something, a crumpled train ticket, yellowed and brittle, like it had been sitting in a drawer for decades. He picked it up, expecting a recent date, but the ink was faded, barely legible. It was dated 20 years earlier, for a stop that Jake knew had been shut down after a derailment in the early 2000s. His hands went cold. He showed the ticket to his coworker, a grizzled guy who'd been on the line for years. The coworker's face paled, and he told Jake about the derailment. A passenger train had gone off the tracks at that exact stop, killing several people, including an older man who'd been found in the last carriage, wrapped in a scarf. Jake didn't sleep for days after that shift. He kept the ticket, locked in a drawer at home, but he never looked at it again. A few months later, he quit the job, saying he couldn't handle the late-night runs anymore. He still won't talk about that night unless he's had a few drinks, and even then, his voice shakes when he mentions the man's eyes. My friend Sarah used to take a commuter train to her job at a bookstore in the city, a 45-minute ride through a mix of suburbs and industrial sprawl. The train was always packed in the mornings, a chaotic mess of students, office workers, and the occasional weirdo shouting into their phone. This story comes from last spring when Sarah was running late for her shift and missed her usual train. She caught the next one, which was less crowded, and ended up in the last carriage, which was strangely empty except for one other passenger, a girl about her age, maybe 20, sitting across the aisle. The girl was hunched over a notebook, her pencils scratching furiously, her dark hair falling over her face like a curtain. Sarah, who's an art major, was curious. She glanced over and saw the girl was sketching intricate drawings of train tracks, but not like any tracks Sarah had ever seen. They twisted and looped in impossible ways, spiraling into shapes that hurt to look at, like optical illusions gone wrong. Despite the creepy vibe, Sarah thought the sketches were impressive, so she leaned over and said, "Nice drawings." The girl looked up, her eyes wide and unblinking, like she'd been caught doing something she shouldn't. She smiled, but it was too tight, too forced. "They tell me what's coming," she said, her voice flat, almost mechanical. Sarah laughed nervously, assuming it was a joke, but the girl didn't laugh back. She just went back to sketching, muttering to herself in a low, rhythmic hum that Sarah couldn't quite make out. The train hit a delay at the next station. "Some mechanical issue," the conductor announced over the intercom. Everyone groaned, stuck waiting on the platform. Sarah pulled out her phone to text her boss, trying to ignore the girl, who was now sketching even faster, her pencil moving like it was possessed. Sarah stole another glance at the notebook, and her breath caught. The girl had drawn their exact carriage, every detail perfect, from the faded red seats to the safety posters on the walls, to the crack in the window by Sarah's seat. But in the sketch, there was something else. A tall, featureless figure standing at the back of the carriage, its arms too long, its fingers jagged like claws. Sarah's heart pounded. She looked toward the back of the carriage. Nothing there, just empty seats. But the air felt heavy, like someone was standing just out of sight, watching her. She grabbed her bag and stood, her legs wobbly, and made her way to the next carriage, squeezing in with the crowd. As she pushed through the connecting door, she glanced back. The girl was still sketching, but now she was staring right at Sarah, her smile wider, almost predatory. The train lurched forward, and Sarah swore she saw a shadow flicker at the back of the empty carriage, right where the figure in the sketch had been. She stayed in the crowded carriage, her pulse racing, checking over her shoulder every few seconds until her stop. When she got off, she practically ran out of the station, her skin crawling with the feeling of being followed. Later that day, she got a text from a coworker who'd been on the same train, different carriage. The train had been taken out of service after Sarah's stop, something about unexplained damage in the last carriage, like something had clawed through the seats. Sarah never saw the girl again, but she still has nightmares about those sketches, and she can't ride a train without checking the back of every carriage. She told me she's convinced the girl was drawing something real, something that was there with them, waiting.